Okay, once again, welcome everyone. Mr. Me, one of the traders from the PipRoom. Glad you all could be here today. This is actually the second part in a six-part training series. We decided to, offer to the VIP members to help you all not just take signals, but actually be better traders and, actually take your trading to a different level. Okay, so the first session we covered last week with Daniel was an awesome session for all of you who were there. We covered some basic Japanese candlestick patterns. So basically today what we're going to do is look at trend lines and how powerful trend lines could be. And we'll also recap the basic Japanese candlestick and integrate with the trend lines. Okay, so if you all have any questions, feel free to hold on to them till the end of the session. If it's a really urgent question, just pop it in the chat, right? So, as I said before, Mr. Me, that's just the alias from the PipRoom. So, today what we want to look at is the power of trend lines, right? Okay, so basically, for the more advanced traders, we already know what a trend line is, so just for the sake of the new traders or even those that have been trading a couple of months, trend lines are basically one of the basic tools that can be used to do technical analysis, right? In my opinion, it's one of the most underutilized tools. Okay, so trend lines are one of the most basic forms of technical analysis that can be done as a forex trader, right? As I mentioned before, in my opinion, trend lines are so underutilized and they are truly effective when applied correctly, right? So these simple lines mostly represent diagonal support and resistance levels in the market, right? So we had done not a major session, but we basically did a quick preview on support and resistance in one of the skills payables section, you know. So basically support and resistance, as I like to emphasize, comes in various forms, right? Support and resistance could be the typical horizontal lines. Support and resistance could come in the forms of moving averages, trend lines, supply zones, demand zones. You really need to grasp the total concept that support and resistance comes in different forms, right? So trend lines basically give us an idea of support and resistance levels, mainly diagonal, right? Trend lines could be horizontal as well, but primarily diagonal due to the fact that they are drawn over pivot highs and under pivot lows to show the prevailing direction of price. Okay, so just to break this down, they are drawn over pivot highs. Pivot highs is just another word for higher highs. We went over the definition of an uptrend and a downtrend. So pivot highs basically speaks to the formation of higher highs in the market, right? Pivot lows is just the opposite, basically lower lows, right? So the creation of lower lows will be your pivot lows, right? So when we say trend lines are drawn over pivot highs and under pivot lows, we would go into an illustration to show where exactly you need to draw the trend line in an uptrending market and a downtrending market. In order for a trend line to be drawn, at least two visible points must be present on the price chart. Okay, ideally, we need to see more than one higher high or lower low to even think about drawing a trend line. They can be drawn on any time frame. However, when drawn on higher time frames, tend to be more effective. And this is something I found true, and some of the more experienced traders as well could probably testify to this. Drawing trend lines on the 1 hour, 4 hour, daily, even the monthly, these trends tend to be, for want of a better word, stronger than the trends on, let's say, a 15-minute or a 5-minute or 1 minute. So this is just a suggestion going out from my experience. Take the trend lines and draw them on the 4 hour time frame and the daily time frame. Right? I'm not saying not to draw trend lines on the lower time frames, but in future you will see how trend lines drawn on the higher time frames tend to hold better than the lower time frame. Okay, so this is the illustration, just clear up the pivot point issue, right? So ideally, in an uptrended market, some beginners would actually draw the trend line on top of price. Ideally, there's nothing wrong with that in terms of when we go into probably establishing channels, but for the purpose of today's session and understanding trend lines in an uptrending market, I want you all to stick to drawing the trend line as a support. So that's below. Okay? And the opposite for a downtrending market, we'll be drawing the trend line to the top. Right? As I mentioned before, there's nothing wrong with establishing a channel and drawing a trend line to the bottom of a downtrending market. But for the purpose of today's session, we'll stick with this structure and this pattern, right? So just to reiterate, in an uptrending market, where we would be placing the trend line to the bottom, and in a downtrending market, we would be placing the trend line to the top. Right? So before we go into the practical examples of actually drawing the trend lines, I just want to do a recap with you guys on some of the basic Japanese candlestick patterns we covered last week. If you guys missed out that session, the recording is available. Just reach out to any one of the administrators, to have access to the recording of the Japanese candlesticks. Because basically the structure of the training program would be one session would lead into the other, right? So if you miss the Japanese candlestick and you happen to join in today on the trend line, it sort of goes hand in hand. So feel free to go over the Japanese candlesticks and then follow up this one. And that's how the sessions would continue moving forward, right? So at the end of the basically the 6-part series, you all should be on a different level of trading that you all presently are. Okay? So there's a lot of Japanese candlestick patterns, right? You don't need to memorize 100 patterns. You don't need to memorize 50 patterns, right? Stick with the simple patterns that you could readily identify and not second guess yourself. So if you have a pen or a paper, you could take a note of these, as well as this chart is available. I could always send out this chart to you guys. So Today we want to focus on the Dragonfly Doji, the Gravestone Doji, Inverted Hammer, Shooting Star. We'll also look at the Hammer, Hanging Man, and we'll probably look at the tweezer bottom and tweezer tops, right? So we're just going to be integrating what we covered last week with the Japanese candlestick into the trendline session. Okay, so for today's session, I chose to use MT4 instead of the trading view, simply because we went through a session again with Daniel on the skills pay bill section, and he showed you all some excellent shortcuts to be used in MetaTrader 4 to actually set your default templates. As I said before, just feel free to reach out to any of the admins for the recording on that session. So basically you all would be able to maneuver MT4 a lot faster with the shortcuts and just level up your trading. Right? So on the MT4 platform, you just scroll to the toolbar and the draw trend line button would be highlighted. Okay, now the color scheme and the colors you choose to place your trend line, it all boils down to personal preference, right? So just covering the slides we did in a downtrending market, where do we all think we should place the trend line? Right, so remember, downtrending market, we're going to place the trend line to the top. Okay, and as mentioned, you need at least 2 points, 2 pivot points, or in this case, lower lows, in order to establish a trend line. Okay, so if you all take a look, right? So basically, when I do my trend lines, I try to avoid the wicks at any cost, right? Now, this would not always be possible. If you take a look at this example here, you would encounter some of the times where price actually wicks off the trend line, but we have 1 good touch, 2, 3, and even 4 good touches on this trend line. But what I need you all to pay attention to on the trend line is some of the candlestick patterns we just mentioned, right? So just going off the basics we just covered with trend line, if you look at every time price came to this particular trend line on the 4-hour chart, it basically created one of the candlestick patterns we went over. Okay, tweezer top, let's see if we can see. No, okay, so if I actually try to zoom in, it would go to current price. But if you all could just pay attention to this red candlestick, Okay. Anybody care to identify? Just one sec, let me check out the audio, guys. Right, so in case the echoing was too much, should be better now. So yeah, so basically going over the trend lines, if you look at every time price reacted to the trend line, it created one of the Japanese candlestick patterns events, all right? So just keep in mind in a downtrending market, place the trend line to the top of price and always look for more
You're an extremely highly sympathetic which I can explain to you.
You could just look for an example of the market going
The
up.
boss was just a middleman link. There are other more dangerous people involved.
You expect me to give up my whole life over this?
Just until the trial. Then you're going to be
Okay, so here in the
How do
market,
you know that?
uptrend.
How do you know anything? Now look, I will keep up my end of the bargain. I will
This is a perfect example I would use. If you
I'm
don't
going home.
see a clear trend, it makes no sense trying to
put people on it right away.
place
need
in
to
a
say
trend line. In my opinion, this trend line would be wrong. Okay, so even as a beginner, try to look for the easier trends to identify with. If it's not there, it's just not there. It makes no sense trying to force this trend line into this uptrending. Even though it has some valid touches, stick to the easier ones. A perfect example would be maybe here. Okay, and just a reminder, in the uptrend, as you could see, the trend line was placed to the bottom, and in the downtrend, the trend line will be placed to the top, right? So just integrating with what we went over with the Japanese candlesticks on the first session, I need you guys to pay attention to the candlestick formation that price makes anytime it returns to this trend. Okay, so I just highlighted a few examples. So basically with the trend line drawn on the higher time frame, Observe for the candlestick formation every time price returns close to the trend. Here would be another perfect example I would use if you don't see a clear trend. And let me just make this point. Sometimes as a new trader, I'm not saying not to have a particular pair or a favorite pair, but if that particular pair has no clear direction, just leave it alone and feel free to move on, okay? The easier setups would come from markets that are clear, uptrend, right? And again, pay attention to the candlestick pattern price makes. Downtrend, okay, so I'll continue to say this. Trend lines, in my opinion, are so underutilized and so powerful. So that's why we decided to include it in the training because plenty people actually underestimate how effective trend lines are. Basically, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, basically a week of price movement here on Eurocard. Okay. So basically, if we had established this trend after, as I mentioned before, you need a minimum of 2 points, but let's say we establish this trend after this third touch here, right? And again, I just want to highlight the candlestick formation. So as I said, if we had established this trend basically after the third touch, this pair actually moved 200 pips since. Okay, this is just to illustrate how effective trend lines are if applied correctly, as well as pay attention as well as just pay attention to the Japanese candlestick formation and the trend. Okay, so for instance, when we get into probably trading channels, that would be our instance where we would draw a trend line to the bottom of our downtrending market. Okay, but for today, if you need to take anything away from this session, in a downtrend, you want to place the trend line above price, and in an uptrend, you want to place the trend line below price to act as support, and in the downtrend, to act as resistance. And just pay attention to the candlestick patterns that price creates every time it reacts towards these trend lines. Right? I would not actually be going into any details of entry. For now, you just need to focus on learning a few of the candlestick patterns. As I said, there is a lot. You don't need to cover all, basically just the ones I mentioned. So you could go through this recording and the candlestick patterns that I mentioned on this session and the ones we covered in the previous session with Daniel. Just go over those, learn them, memorize them. So when you actually hit the live charts, you could identify them without second guessing yourself. Okay, so I actually highlighted some, highlighted some, highlighted some. And I'm going to mention something. A lot of us don't like to hear the word homework, but at the end of the day, if you need to level up your trading, you need to do the homework. You need to actually go and practice drawing these trend lines. You actually need to go and revisit the Japanese candlestick patterns because these sessions will just keep moving forward, right? So basically, the ultimate goal of these sessions is not just to be providing you guys with high quality signals, but for you guys to become independent and be able to actually trade as an independent trader, one, and actually to make better use of the signals, okay? So for instance, a signal was given, instead of immediately entering the signal with the skills you would acquire from these sessions, you could actually open your chart and take a look at the, the signal, right? Take a look at why the trader called that particular signal. See if the signal is still valid without waiting for one of the traders from the room to, actually tell it, close the trade, you know. So yeah, these sessions are solid foundation, and just getting the homework. Right, so maybe we can look at one other pair. Okay, so here we have Euro USD. As I mentioned before, I like to draw trend lines on the higher time frames, the 4-hour, the daily, even the monthly. Right, so this is present price of Euro USD. As we could see, we actually have this small uptrend that has been started. And as we learned today, in our uptrend, we want to place the trend line to the bottom of price. We have one valid touch, 2, 3, and I think I would leave this for the guys on Markup Sunday, but we actually have a break. of this trend line. So the guys on Sunday will definitely analyze this and probably confirm Euro USD to either continue downward if price closes back above the trend line to continue going higher, probably respecting this trend. Okay, so that's the basic aspect of the trend lines. So before we actually open up for questions and wind down the session today, this is something I normally do on the daily time frame. Before drawing my trend lines on the daily time frame, I actually switch to the line chart. Now this method can be used on the 4 hour as well. I just found it to be more effective for my strategy on the daily. And the reason we actually switch to the line chart as compared to the Japanese candlestick chart that gives you the price with the wicks, on the line chart, basically all these turns in the market, all these points are actually the opening and closing price. Right? So by switching to the line chart actually plots only the opening and closing price. Right? So personally, I don't really like this trend line. I just drew it to show you all the example of switching from the Japanese candlesticks to the line chart to have a more accurate trend line. But basically, this trend line, you see how price falls below, comes on up, falls below. If it happened once, you could consider it to be a false break, but again, we see it happen. So I personally don't like how price has been reacting to this trend line. So we'll just use this as an example on how to draw the trend line using the line chart. Right, so let's see if we could find a better example on this one here. Okay, so let's use this example here. Uptrend, trend line, bottom. Okay, 1, 2, valid touch, 3. Okay, so nothing is wrong with switching to the line chart to get a actual closer analysis than with the Japanese candlesticks. But ultimately, you still need to look at the candlestick formation at the trend line. Okay, so before we actually wrap up the session today, we just do a quick recap, a really fast recap. Right, so trend lines, as I said before, in my opinion, are one of the basic forms of technical analysis that are underutilized, right? Right, so they are drawn over the pivot highs as we covered in the practical session. Basically, pivots are the higher highs and the lower lows. In the uptrend, we place the trend line to the bottom to act as support. And in the downtrend, we place the trend line to the top to act as resistance. Alright guys, so basically that's it for today's session. The recording will be placed in the library that we created for you guys in the VIP room. So just run through the session along with the Japanese candlesticks, because this would just be added on as we go forward to the dynamic support and resistance, right? So ultimately, at the end of the 6 training sessions, we would put everything together, and basically you guys should have a basic trading strategy along with risk management, and you all could be looking for some very profitable setups and trades on your own, right? So if any questions, feel free to PM any of the admins, okay? And you guys do enjoy the rest of your day.